Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we talk about today's news, views, trends, and opinions from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and this evening we're joined by Jim Geraghty, author, also a contributor to National Review Online, and we're glad to have him on the show. Jim, thanks for joining us.
Chris, great to be here.
So, I let it slip. You're with the National Review Online. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got involved in journalism, and kind of how things are trending.
Sure. Well, I had grown up in high school wanting to be a political cartoonist, very much shaped by the twisted mind of Gary Larson and The Far Side, or Berkeley Breathed and Bloom County, and just kind of even a little bit of Gary Trudeau. At that point, I was raised in a house of Republicans, but still just found things in politics funny. Dana Carvey impersonating George H.W. Bush and things like that. And kind of just being interested in politics, kind of just finding it funny and strange and wanting to know more about it so that I could get the jokes, right? I mean, it's not just a guy doing silly things. It's a guy saying things that if you know what they're making fun of and the policies and statements about these political figures, it's just funnier.
It is hard to find things funny in politics, so kudos to you for trying.
Yeah, well, you know. And so I interested in that, and then I had found out the rather brutal, hard truth that you have a much better chance, I'm not making these figures up, of being struck by lightning than making a living as a political cartoonist in the United States. More people get struck by lightning. That you may have heard that they used to have these things called newspapers. I realize we're in Silicon Valley, the home of the internet and all these things.
Paper-based computer tablets.
They used to take pulp of a tree and smash it together and stuff like that. We at National Review actually have this, we held this alchemaic formula and still print out what they call it National Review on Dead Tree. You can find it at these institutions called newsstands or subscriptions, in which, remember what they had before Amazon's drone program, in which they would drop things at your house? There was a man called the mailman who would actually drp it, provide it to you through a subscription.
Was he with the NSA?
He was not.
No credibility,
yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so. But so I kind of knew that I wanted to be involved something in writing, and just the kind of those first early experiences of writing for a college newspaper and seeing people the next day reacting to stuff that I had written. It was kind of one of the few experiences I've had with real community journalism. It was in Washington, D.C. I eventually said, okay, this is what I want to do. Writing about these things, telling people things I didn't know before. That, at its very best, is kind of that noble calling worth of journalism, which is almost as outdated as the idea of print and the mailman and all these other things that are,
Next, you're going to start using words like objectivity or something.
Back in my day, let me tell you, yes.
We weren't allowed to have opinions openly.
Well, the other thing, I read National Review and Weekly Standard and occasionally the American Spectator and these other conservative magazines, and I liked them.
And
I was
you were
right
how old at that time?
This is, college, post-college. This is the mid to late Clinton years.
Okay.
So the dot-com boom is going on. Probably the glory days out here of we're going to make millions selling rutabagas over the internet. Those kinds of things. Yeah. And just kind of finding the writing exciting and funny. I know it'll strike you as you said that there's nothing funny in politics. You may remember President Clinton. He had a little bit of a scandal. Wee bit of an interaction with somebody he shouldn't have, which just kind of was this natural, bountiful source of sometimes very very sharp, angry writing of if you, Mr. President, if you really wanted that, you didn't have to run for president. You could score chicks in lots of other ways. You don't need to become leader of the free world. Though, probably would be a really good way to meet chicks, though.
Well, but there's no desk of that caliber
there you go. Yes,
in these other environments.
He'd always have that fantasy, and this is exactly where you thought this interview was going to go. That sense that, so it just kind of seemed like this is where I wanted to be. And I started, sending out resumes, and it may shock you, but you can't just walk in the door and start writing for these institutions. It turns out there's a lot more people who want to write for them than they have slots to actually hire people and pay. So I worked for mainstream journalism institutions like Congressional Quarterly, a couple of long-defunct .coms, policy.com, intellectualcapital.com, and speakout.com. Stunningly didn't make money. I know it's a shock, particularly people in your viewing area, that a .com could not make money, but apparently you need to sell something to create a good or service that people will pay for.
Really? And
yeah.
Did you actually go the extra step of writing the business plan on more than a napkin? Because that could have been overachievement and...
I'm talent. I don't bother with such things. Actually, I was content then.
Oh, okay.
Which I guess it should, I guess in the sense that you're content to have a job at that stage, as you can see the handwriting on the wall. But you have this sense of There was about one tumultuous year of excitement, and then that kind of ominous music playing in the background as you walk. The staff gets smaller and smaller. I particularly remember one day, this is at speakout.com, we had a content staff, meaning writers,
right,
of about 11. And we'd heard the bad news. The things.
YourOut.com was going to be taking over.
There you go.
Yeah.
This was a year when the Pets.com puppet was resorted to cannibalism. There were signs all around of there was a website called, I'm just going to paraphrase, Bad Worded Company.
Yes.
Which you could get the updates on the latest companies going, and you check in every day. What are they saying about ours? Is there any word about us?
I visited that site regularly.
There you go.
Yeah. Happy
memories, I'm sure.
Yes.
So they went from a staff of 11 to a writing staff of 4, meaning 7 people had lost their jobs. In the meeting, they're having this discussion. I remember people said, well, why isn't Jim getting fired too? Wait a second, what's so special about him? So it's nice to know there was that sense of solidarity, right? We were all in this together.
Yes.
And while these poor folks, and they're all good colleagues, other than the ones who were asking for me to be fired too, we're in the meeting, getting the bad news. It's heartbreaking. The tech staff came and started taking the office supplies from their desk while they were getting that meeting, and it was this fantastic, vivid illustration of the tooth and claw, dog eat dog, eat pets.com little puppet world that the .coms were in right then.
Yeah.
And probably an indicator of what things are going to be. So shockingly enough, only a few months later, they eliminated the rest of the staff. And then I went to work for a wire service called States News Service. It's no longer around. You may notice a pattern in my career of, hi, I'm the angel of death.
Yeah,
I'm Jim.
National Review Online, it's June now.
It's doing fit. I've been there 11 years. It's been going astonishingly well.
Okay.
So we broke the streak. Yeah, and it was a good, useful experience of working for a wire service, acting as the Washington bureau for a lot of newspapers that didn't have Washington bureaus, like the Bergen Record. And this is the West Coast. If I say the name Bob Torricelli, does it ring any vague bells of ominous corruption and sleaziness, or?
Not for me personally, but there might be.
He was a New Jersey senator who basically had a strange habit of wearing really fancy Rolexes that you kind of wondered how he'd afford on a senatorial salary. He had alienated just about every other reporter in Washington on the New Jersey beat, who basically saw him as the joke was he was a Sopranos character, that he just came across as this this stereotype of the corrupt Pole. And since I was new on the job, he'd come and he'd talk about the Save the Fishes in the Ocean Act or something like that.
Because you got to feed the fish.
Exactly. There's some sort of like calamari joke in there or something. But you get that basically he would talk about it. Every other reporter would say, these allegations of taking inappropriate gifts and stuff like that. I joked that we had a macro on our computer for Torricelli spokeswoman Deborah Deschong vehemently denied the allegations. That once per article, you'd put that in there somewhere for. And I'd be the one person so tell me about the Save the Fishes in the Ocean Act or something. And within like 3 months, I was his favorite reporter because I was the only guy who wasn't saying, so you're a ludicrously corrupt SOB and we're waiting for the indictment. What do you say to such and such? So from that, I was able to get, being told you're Bob Torricelli's favorite reporter kind of makes you want to take a shower. It's not the best feeling in the world, but from that, covering stories like that, I remember pitching to National Review Online and wanted to write there for a long time. Now that I work there, people ask me, how do you write for National Review Online? Right. That's a very simple answer. You just have to write the article that we wish we had written and hadn't in just the way we'd like to write it and present it to us.
Right.
And we'll go, okay, great. There you go.
No
Welcome,
problem.
you're in. There you go.
Yeah.
Very simple bar to clear. And it was probably like the 20th article I'd submitted to them. Right. But it opened the door. And the great thing is that once you've done that, then the door is open. Then every other idea you pitch, it's a much more open.
You just have to have a little bit of street cred internally, and then off you go.
There you go. So.
But one of the things we were talking about before the show is that you actually noticed that we're coming into a time in the political season where you're seeing a trend of we joked of sometimes liberalism being called a mental disorder in certain circles, but we're heading into sophisticated cannibalism time for people right of center.
Yeah, so my first gig with National Review full-time was a blog called The Kerry Spot. This was middle of May 2004. The primaries have largely ended on the Democratic side. Bush is an incumbent running for re-election. And to give you a perspective, I'm so old I remember when blogging was new. And so we kept it going in one form or another, but as heading into 2008 and then into 2012, Primary season turned into my least favorite time. Now, I write for National Review, a conservative institution. Most of my readers are conservative, but not exclusively. Most of the time, you write, Obama stinks because of X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Readers are going to love it. Hillary stinks because of X, Y, and Z. Readers are going to love it. And then you start writing something saying, Marco Rubio is pretty good because of X, Y, and Z. The Rand Paul fans will say, well, no, you're on the take. Rhino, and now we've got, 2008 was really kind of a five-way race between McCain, Romney, Giuliani, Huckabee, and Ringo, I think, was the last. So at some point, now I'm blank on who that guy was.
It'll be okay.
Yeah.
We'll proceed on.
There you go. But if you don't mention their favorite candidate, Duncan Hunter, for example,
you're on the take anyway.
Right
That's
now,
why you left the other guy off the ballot.
We're in California. There's some Duncan Hunter fan out there who's like, "How dare you, Mr. Geraghty, forget to mention the electoral powerhouse? Yes, he didn't win a single delegate, but still, us 3% who voted for him remember." And it brings out everybody's internal frustrations, suspicions. Anything you write suddenly goes through you're secretly biased against my guy. And, do I have preferences in the field? Sure, I'm a human being. I try to be as straightforward about it. Some people will tell you...
you don't like all 18 equally?
Well, okay, that's the thing. Yeah. We now have a zip code running for president on the Republican side.
Yeah.
Yes. And... on the one hand, this is good. There's no shortage of interesting things to write about.
Right.
And actually, one of the things I've kind of tried to do more of this cycle is to actually, what do people not know about these guys that they want to know? Now, a little while ago, the New York Times did a fascinating investigative report on the the speeding tickets of Marco Rubio
And his wife.
Because
they couldn't find enough on
yes,
just
4
one.
for him since '97. Which, I mean, we're in California. You get 4 when you get your license, just automatically, right?
Actually, you can't renew without that. I
there you go. Okay, I
I
was going to
think
say.
that's what it is.
And maybe out here you don't encounter them. I live in Northern Virginia, a lovely little community called Authenticity Woods. And when I get cut off in traffic, there's like a 50-50 shot. Maryland or Florida. And I used to get angry about this. I used to think, my God, why can't these people drive, And all of a sudden, okay, if you grow up in an area where everyone around you is driving like a maniac, maybe you just internalize it. Like maybe you have to do it defensively. You have to drive like a maniac to survive. You don't get to see the good drivers from Florida or Maryland because they've already been run off the road.
Right.
But so this is all these bunch of easy jokes, but really like 17, moving violations between 2 people in Florida over like 10 years. Really not that much.
Right.
So that's my exhibit A of bad campaign journalism. Like what, if you like Marco Rubio, you look at that and you're like, this is a crap story. This is this is apparently opposition research shopped by American Bridge, a pro-Obama super PAC. It just comes across as a cheap shot and silly, and like the idea, well, I was going to vote for him, but now I'm not going to because I read about all those speeding tickets. You realize if Marco Rubio becomes president, he gets a motorcade. Right? You never have to worry about Marco Rubio driving anywhere ever again. In fact, this is a strong argument to make him president, make a safer America under Marco Rubio.
To get him off the road.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, take the wheel away.
So what I started trying to do is to look at the earlier chapters of some of these candidates' lives. And Rick Perry was very, very nice to chat with me about his Air Force years and everything from his scariest experience in the cockpit, which, by the way, was when his engine exploded. Which, that strikes me as a really scary moment. But he said that was actually the second scariest moment, By the way, it was flying, I believe, a C-130. It was a large, plane with 4 engines. So you have 3 extra.
Right.
But nonetheless, you look out and there's the propellers flying off and pieces and smoke and all that kind of stuff.
What was the first scariest?
Apparently, he was flying through a storm in Europe. This all take place in the early 70s. And they had an experience, they call it St. Elmo's fire. Basically, like glowing lightning. Your lightning basically comes up, electricity up through the, you can just kind of see all this kind of stuff, glowing through your instrument pad and stuff like that. And apparently it was a violent thunderstorm. Obviously, Rick Perry lived to tell the tale. It didn't crash or anything like that. But, again, now, maybe this makes you like Perry more, maybe it doesn't. He doesn't tell you much about what would Rick Perry do on taxes. Maybe you feel him talking about his experience as a member of the U.S. Air Force maybe gives him an understanding of some defense issues or what's going through the minds of the men and women in the armed forces in a way that a candidate who hasn't served isn't. It
makes me wonder if that helped affect his speech actually during the debates. That could have been a a storage issue.
A flashback to the ball lightning or something like that. Maybe, yeah. Or that of the back pain medication. But yeah. But again, it was a lot of people liked it, got shared like a bazillion times on social media because it was telling you something about Rick Perry you didn't know already.
Right.
And maybe you like him more. Maybe I actually have a very hard time thinking, well, he was a pilot. I dislike him. Boy, I don't like that. But maybe
we don't like Jets in this country. Actually, there could be
I'm a New York Jets fan, sir. You take that back. So I have had enough suffering in my life so far. So. No, but another good example was Marco Rubio as Speaker. There are some people who will say Rubio hasn't run anything in his life. For 2 years, he was in charge of the House of Representatives down in Florida. What did he do? And looked at his autobiography, looked at people who served with him. He would be the first to tell you it was not the roaring success he envisioned. The short version is that even though at that time Republicans ran the state house, ran the state senate, and ran the governor's mansion, it was Charlie Crist years, they all had very different ideas of what the priorities were. And he envisioned a really sweeping change in property taxes, and it got shrunk down to about half of what he wanted to say. Right. But maybe from that you can conclude how Marco Rubio would deal with the Democratic Congress or with tough opposition or something like that. Right. He's a guy who'll take half a loaf. He'll take the best deal on the table when you're right up against the deadline. But again, I feel like for a Republican primary voter who's really trying to figure out who should I vote for, tell me more about these guys. I'd like to think this is helpful journalism. I'd like to think this is something that may find a little more productive than, speeding tickets or did you hear about how big his boat is? That the 80-foot monster,
Well, so in addition to politics, you were the first to say you need to have a life outside politics as well, and you write other stuff.
I do. My probably most interesting one in the last year was a novel called The Weed Agency.
And which, when I heard the title, I thought that a lot of our more libertarian friends were going to be very excited about the content we were going to be covering over the next few minutes.
Yeah, probably the only reason I ended up on the Bill Maher show was they completely misinterpreted. It's not about marijuana. Although, actually, no. If you're interested in marijuana, yes, it is. In fact, the book is printed on rolling paper, so buy 2 copies. No, it's a novel. It's a fictional, fake but accurate, to use the term Dan Rather used for his memos. It's a novel, but it takes place over 30 years, and the story of a fictional but inspired by real life federal agency whose job is to deal with weeds, to deal with the menace of invasive species, and they both basically get a portrait of it that it is starts out very small, rapidly expands. Everything that happens in American life over 30 years is a crisis that they need more funding to deal with. That there are certain people who think this is a waste of money, but it turns out to be difficult to uproot. I mean, are you starting to get
the weed analogy?
Am I hitting you over the head with the analogy hard enough? Yes. But basically, can you write about the federal bureaucracy and make it funny?
Right.
And to try to make an example of why does Washington work, or in some cases not work the way it does.
Right.
And also, I tried to write for those who are afraid it'd be conservative agitprop. Which there's, it's about 10% conservative agitprop. I tried to write a very human story, about why people go to work for the federal government. And the honest answer is some of the toughest critics of the federal bureaucracy you'll find are people who work for the federal government and who have this, I think, very idealistic, maybe a little naive vision of doing something productive and useful and helping people.
Right.
They generally enter government wanting to make the world a better place. And then, bit by bit, the system just kind of grinds them down, and kind of the sense of like, well, this is the way we've always done these things, so this is why we're going to do these things forever. And they kind of like, well, they're treating me this way because I'm on the low band on the totem pole. I probably committed like 12 hate crimes with that metaphor, but I'm too low on the ladder. I can't actually change things. But once I get a little higher, then I'll have the power to do it.
Right.
Okay, not this job, but when I get my next promotion, and bit by bit, and what happens is after a while, you kind of just get to use one of these Star Trek references that my colleague Catherine Jean Lopez would have banned from the corner years ago. You get assimilated into the Borg collective. You actually become part of the system. Eventually, you forget why you came there, because now you're in charge, and you like all the perks, and you like the way things have done. And wait a minute, so kind of like it's not necessarily a cheery. I don't end it with, and here's how we change the federal bureaucracy, folks. Come on, let's get these guys. It's not that. It's kind of a sense of like, in some ways, it's kind of baked in the cake of human nature.
Right.
But as a result of that, maybe we shouldn't be entrusting federal bureaucracy with like running the healthcare industry or something like that.
They don't. The IRS does.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, keeping personal records. Because the IRS is never going to get hacked.
Yeah.
Or Office of Personnel Management. Those guys are awesome. They're like the Matrix.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And always, it would never be used for evil. It's always for good.
Oh, the IRS. If you can't trust actually, for any IRS agents watching, you are dedicated public servants, and I've always stood up for you, and I've always felt bad the way you're able to. If anyone, this guy Chris, he was before the show, he was talking smack about you the whole time, and I don't know if all those deductions are on the up and up. So, but,
And then we've had the security issues recently of stuff being hacked, and we're thinking it's by China, maybe. But,
yes.
But obviously, I feel safe with all of my private records being entrusted to the government because they're being well protected.
If you can't trust the government in corporate America, who can you trust? I was going to say the one time I had applauded the creation of a czar. You may remember back in 2009, early in Obama administration, that well, if you submit somebody to be undersecretary of such and such, they have to be approved by the Senate, and they might not approve them. So
just make them a czar, and they go past the process.
The magic wand of czardom, but they wanted to create a cyber czar. They wanted to do something to deal with cyber defenses. And I actually wrote, for those who think of me as this, remorseless right-wing hack who does nothing but hate the Obama administration, I said, this is a good idea. I had a chance to be at a conference and speak to some folks who did this professionally at, big companies like, I probably shouldn't mention them, but, big company guys.
Yes.
And they're freaked about this. And they think, somebody could try to take down air traffic control. Somebody could try to take down the wood utilities and stuff like that. Right. And the intriguing thing that they had said, and the reason it made sense to have a czar, is that power plants, well, Department of Energy handles that. DOD has their, cybersecurity folks over here. Obviously, the NSA, there are all these different little portions of the government that have some piece of the puzzle.
Right.
But there's no one person in a crisis where you say, all right, and I just wanted that one guy in a crisis. I wanted that guy to be played by Harrison Ford, or whoever or it wouldn't be Keanu, but the idea of that, Tracy, get me the best cyber guy you have, and for that guy to be, and if something goes wrong, to turn to that guy and say, okay, what do we do? Because elevators are careening out of buildings or something.
And you're
like
expecting all those agencies to actually talk to one person, which entertains me.
Yeah, that's a good point. This is where I have my own bit of naivete about government bureaucracy or something. But it's a brave new world. I'm sure that as we speak, there's probably some North Korean or Chinese hacker who's going through our files as we speak. So
yeah, don't bother coming after the show. We're really too small to eat. But
they'll get to us before the IRS does. So,
yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
So. As these things go through, you're also working on one more book coming up. What's that going to be about? Is it going to be political? Is it going to be...
It is not. The good folks at Regnery Publishing, after the Weed Agency came out and did fairly well, it was a Washington Post bestseller for 1 week, but that's okay, that they said, do you have any other ideas? I said, well, here's my next novel idea. Like, no. What nonfiction ideas do you have? And you may have... So I'm thinking about this trend of... men who are not getting married, dropping out of the workforce, not having kids. They're married, pretty much since the recession of 2008, 2009. Marriage rates dropped, childbearing dropped, and obviously, serious long-term unemployment went up. A lot of it was
the numbers are lower.
Yeah,
I've seen that.
Yeah, it's so much better now once you
take all the people off. You
take the discouraged workers out of there. Yeah, and it just kind of seemed like a very strange phenomenon. And I started talking to young guys. And they basically would say, getting married, having kids, you turn into Ward Cleaver, right? You turn into your life being, ball and chain and all that kind of stuff. Now, you ask a large number of married guys, their wife, their kids, this is what makes life worth living, right? Growing up, there's this perception that adulthood is this miserable, responsible experience. I want to say to every one of these guys, grab them by the lapels and say, no, this is what makes life worth living. And to not have any attachments, that's actually what makes you miserable and depressed.
Right. So it'll be a book about real life.
In a way, it'll hopefully be a funny portrait of fatherhood and growing up and all the things that make life worth living. That I think a lot of young men walking around and think, that's not for me. I'm gonna be a slacker forever.
Well, so we are going to have to cut this part of the segment off. But before we go, tell us a little bit about how people can find about the current book, stay on track for the new book. Website?
Sure. NationalReview.com is where you can find most of my work. The book from last year is The Weed Agency, available on Amazon and everywhere else. And the new book is going to be called Heavy Lifting, and it should be coming out right before Christmas from fine retailers everywhere.
All right, Jim. Well, thanks for joining us.
Always enjoy it.
And we'll be back after a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum. We're going to...
The Conservative Forum of Silicon Valley began with 20 conservatives meeting at a restaurant in November of 2003. Our mission is to promote the principles of American liberty through education. By 2012, we had grown to over 600 paid members. Our monthly meetings feature well-known and prestigious conservative speakers addressing issues that are critical to our country's very survival. This includes speakers like Victor Davis Hanson, Andrew Breitbart, David Horowitz, and many others. In addition to our monthly meetings, we sponsor a conservative local cable access TV show, The Right Side, covering today's topics. Our Constitution discussion group not only teaches the Constitution, but started our annual essay contest that awards 2 $1,000 scholarships to local high school seniors. We are a virtual clearinghouse for grassroots organizations by providing them with table space at no charge in our exhibit area. There are typically a dozen groups represented. If you are like-minded, join us at our next meeting and become motivated and empowered. Liberty, made in America.
And welcome back to the right side. That was a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum. And we thank them immensely for making the show possible for the last 3.5 years. They've kept us on the air. Thank you folks for doing that. But what they're really best known for is their speaker series. And one of the reasons we were lucky enough to have Jim on the show this evening is that he will be speaking as the June speaker at the Conservative Forum at 432 Stearland Road right here in Mountain View, about 3 minutes from here. The show starts at 7 p.m. But in August, actually, Geert Wilders will be on, controversial figure nationwide and internationally. He's a Dutch politician and strong advocate of stopping the Islamization of the Netherlands. In November, Kurt Schlichter, Army Colonel, trial lawyer, and national commentator for Fox News, Dennis Miller, Hugh Hewitt, and others will be speaking at the forum. If you'd like more information on the content that will be shared there, you can reach out to theconservativeforum.com and find out more there. And in closing, Jim brought up some very interesting points about the way that journalism has kind of evolved over time. We talked a little bit about the objectivity being lost, but also about how conservative politics tend to be very interesting around this time of the season, where the primaries bring out the best in people that should be, they should be bringing out the best. Actually, what it does is brings out the canines, and they start attacking each other violently. Something that I think that we need to get better about. You can combat one another in a way that's fair and won't leave permanent damage. That's actually better for the conservative side of things, but also for the country as a whole, to get things back on the track of moving forward. But you can learn more about him and his work at the National Review online, or his books such as The Weed Agency and others that he has coming by tracking him down there. So thanks for joining us this evening. I've been your host, Chris Pareja. I look forward to seeing you in person or on the show sometime soon. But if you just can't wait, reach out to us at therightsidetv@gmail.com, and we'll try to answer your questions there. Thanks again for joining us. I hate my brain.